Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis, where we kind of dig into the link between creativity and mental illness.
Yeah.
I was prepping for today and reading the front matter to The Anatomy of Melancholy.
Okay.
And I found this really cool story. So it turns out that The Anatomy of Melancholy was like the only book that could ever get Dr. Johnson out of bed, like 2 hours earlier than he wanted to.
Wow. I mean, if that's not an indication of how captivating this book is, I don't know what is.
Right. Like we should all find a book like that, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of captivating, I was really struck by like how Burton actually goes about defining melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like not just sadness for him, it's more like this whole complex condition with like physical, emotional, and even mental components. He really digs deep into the history of this term and like how it was understood by these like ancient thinkers and physicians.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is like Burton's, he divides the body into three parts, head, heart, and liver. And he associates each one of those parts with specific humors and temperaments.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And he puts melancholy straight in the head and links it to an excess of black bile.
Wait, hold on. Black bile. What is that? Like some kind of ancient medical thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't use humors in medicine today, but for Burton and his contemporaries, this was like how they understood the body's balance.
Okay.
And, if there were imbalances, like how that could lead to illness.
Okay, so it's like melancholy wasn't just like a feeling. It was like almost like a physical thing.
Exactly.
Rooted in this kind of gloomy sounding substance.
Yeah. And what's even more interesting is how Burton like links this black bile concept to intellectual pursuits. Like he suggests that people who are prone to melancholy, they're like deep thinkers a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
And they're drawn to being alone and like thinking a lot.
Okay, so that's starting to sound a little bit more like Mad Genius-y to me.
Right. So he's kind of like painting this picture of someone with a rich inner world and their mind's always churning and analyzing, creating things. But of course, this intense mental activity that's happening could also be like a double-edged sword, right?
Right, because too much of anything can throw you off balance.
Exactly.
So if this melancholic temperament was rooted in the body, what were some of the things that he thought could cause it?
Well, some of his ideas may sound a little out there to us now. He actually believed that supernatural forces like, witchcraft or demonic influence
Oh, wow.
could play a role in causing melancholy.
So very much a product of his time. Were there any causes that he identified that like we might actually relate to today?
Absolutely. So he talks about like suppressed desires and even mentions celibacy.
Celibacy? I guess that's one way to like avoid romantic turmoil.
Right.
But
Yeah.
seriously, it's interesting how he connects this idea of like pent up energy or frustration to melancholy.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's like recognizing the importance of like emotional expression.
Yeah. And then here's where it gets even more relatable.
Okay.
He lists overmuch waking as a cause of melancholy.
I can definitely relate to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of us in today's, fast-paced world, that feeling of like a restless mind that just won't shut off, it's pretty common.
It is. It is.
Do you think he might have been onto something there? Like, could this tendency toward, insomnia or whatever,
Yeah.
could it be connected to a more active, creative mind?
It's possible. It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
And he also talks about poverty as a cause of melancholy. And that also resonates with, struggles a lot of artists and creative types face, even today.
Right. The starving artist.
Exactly.
It's almost like he's saying that like a certain level of like sensitivity and awareness of the world, both its beauty and like the harsh realities, it can make someone both like more prone to melancholy and also more likely to like express those experiences through like creative outlets.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. It gets to the heart of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, totally. So we've talked about what he thought caused it, but what about cures? Did he offer any solutions for like lifting the dark clouds?
He did, and some of them might surprise you.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Well, Burton was a big proponent of using diet to balance the humors
Okay.
and alleviate melancholy. He recommended eating light and easily digestible foods and avoiding heavy, rich meals.
That makes sense. That actually sounds pretty in line with, modern thinking about gut health
Yeah.
and its impact on mood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And he also stressed the importance of exercise and fresh air.
Okay.
And advocated for activities like walking, gardening, even horseback riding.
Okay, so not so different from, our gym routines and fitness trackers.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then there's one of his more interesting recommendations, travel.
Oh?
He thought that a change of scenery could be a powerful remedy for melancholy.
Now that's a prescription I can get behind. Sign me up. A trip to Italy to cure my melancholy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He also saw the value in things like music, dancing, and companionship
Okay.
as ways to like uplift the spirits
Yeah.
and combat that isolation that often accompanies melancholy.
Okay, so basically a good party.
Well, in a way, yeah. He was really emphasizing the importance of social connection and enjoyable activities for like mental well-being, which is something that modern psychology still stresses today.
Right. It makes you wonder if like some of those social gatherings might have been where, the creative sparks flew.
Yeah.
Like imagine those Renaissance salons. You've got the artists and the writers, and they're like bouncing ideas off of each other.
Yeah.
Maybe even finding like solace and inspiration in like their shared experiences with melancholy.
That's a really cool thought. And it really speaks to how Burton's ideas, even though they're like from a different time, they still resonate with us today.
They do, yeah. But before we get too carried away with like time-traveling fantasies or whatever, I'm curious about some of the more unusual remedies that he proposed.
Uh-huh.
I hear he had a thing for precious stones.
He did. Burton thought that certain gems and minerals had like healing properties and that they could be used to combat melancholy.
So like carrying around a lucky crystal.
Kind of, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It might seem far-fetched now, but it's a reminder that our understanding of mental health has like really evolved over the centuries.
It really has. It's cool to see how those like old beliefs and practices still kind of influence how we think today.
Yeah.
Even if it's just the placebo effect of like a lucky charm or whatever.
Right.
But even with like his belief in these more mystical remedies, Burton really always emphasized that addressing the mind was key to curing melancholy.
Definitely. He thought that like understanding the root causes of, someone's melancholy, whether it was like things happening around them or like physical imbalances or even, internal conflicts, he thought that was super important to finding lasting relief.
So it wasn't just about treating the symptoms, but like really digging into those complexities of the mind and like addressing those underlying issues.
Exactly. Yeah. He thought that true healing had to come from inside.
Wow. That's a really modern perspective for someone writing, all those centuries ago. It makes you realize that these struggles with, melancholy and mental health are like they're really timeless and universal.
Yeah, they are. And that's why Burton's work is still so fascinating to us today.
Totally, yeah. But before we go too far down that road, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we'll dig deeper into like, did Burton's anatomy of melancholy, even though he didn't explicitly use the term, did it lay the groundwork for the Mad Genius Thesis? Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. So before the break, we are discussing Robert Burton's anatomy of melancholy and, some of his interesting thoughts about the causes and cures for this really complex condition. And now it's time to really get into like the main question of our deep dive, which is like that link between melancholy and creativity.
Right, yeah. So we've already talked about how Burton didn't actually use the phrase mad genius.
Right.
But does his work like hint at this connection? This idea that there's maybe a link between like a melancholic temperament and creative potential.
I think it does. So Burton saw that like people who were prone to melancholy were often these deep thinkers.
Yeah.
Like they were really sensitive to like the world going on around them and also prone to a lot of introspection. And these traits, while they could lead to, some darker moods, could also be like the same things that fuel creative expression.
They're like experiencing the world on a whole other level,
Yeah.
feeling everything like more deeply,
Yeah.
the highs and the lows.
Exactly. And that like heightened sensitivity and that capacity for, profound emotional experience, that could be like the source of their art,
Yeah.
Think about like poets like Sylvia Plath or musicians like Kurt Cobain. Like their work is often, it has this raw energy that seems to just come from like a place of deep feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting though because like Burton seems to suggest that like there's this fine line
Yeah.
between like a melancholic state and a state of like creative inspiration.
Yeah.
Like he talks about how like too much black bile, it can like cloud your mind and lead to despair. But he also like acknowledges that this same substance, if you have it in moderation, might actually be important for intellectual vitality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Burton thought that balance was like the key thing.
Okay.
He saw melancholy as a spectrum.
Okay.
And while too much could be, really bad, just a touch of it might actually like enhance your creativity.
So it's not about like romanticizing mental illness.
Right.
Or saying that all creative people are like tortured souls or something.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that there can be this like complex interplay between mental states and creative output.
Absolutely. And that's like, I think, where Burton's work makes us think about the mad genius thing.
Yeah.
It's so easy to think that, great art has to come from suffering, right?
Yeah.
But what Burton's saying reminds us that creativity can come from all kinds of places and that mental health isn't like one size fits all.
Right. Yeah. Not all creative people have mental illness, and not all people with mental illness are creative. It's much more complicated than that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's way more nuanced. And I think Burton's work encourages us to like embrace that. Like move beyond simple stereotypes and appreciate like the whole spectrum of human experience.
It's like he's saying, hey, like let's not like boil these brilliant minds down to like a caricature of their struggles.
Right.
Let's see their genius, their sensitivity, like their way of seeing the world, and recognize that like mental health is this journey, not a destination.
That's a really great way to put it. And it brings us back to like Burton's lasting impact. The Anatomy of Melancholy, even though it was written over 400 years ago, it still means something to us today because it deals with like basic questions about being human. Like, what is creativity? How do our minds and bodies, work together? And how can we find like balance and well-being in this crazy world?
Yeah, those are huge questions. And I think it really shows how brilliant Burton was, that he was like thinking about these things centuries before we even had modern psychology.
Yeah, he was a true pioneer in figuring out how the mind works. And, some of his ideas might seem, kind of old-fashioned now.
Yeah.
But his basic ideas about, like, how complex humans are and how our physical and emotional and mental states are all connected, that's still super relevant.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so we talked about how Burton's work might be, like, the foundation for the mad genius idea. But he also seems to be, like, pushing back against any like simple way of looking at that connection.
Right.
He's acknowledging that there might be a link between like melancholy and creativity, but he's also saying, hey, balance is important and self-awareness is important, and asking for help when you need it is important.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think his work is still so valuable today.
Yeah.
He reminds us that mental health isn't just like a yes or no thing. It's a whole spectrum. And we all have times of darkness and light.
It's like we all have our own like inner weather patterns, and
Yeah.
sometimes those storms can get pretty intense.
Absolutely. And Burton's work gives us like a way to understand those patterns.
Yeah.
To like recognize what sets them off and to find ways to get through those rough times.
So what does all this mean for us,
Yeah.
our listeners who might be dealing with their own mental health, or maybe thinking about how their like creative urges are connected to their emotional struggle?
Yeah.
What can we take away from Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy?
I think Burton offers a few key insights. First, he's saying that mental health is a journey. It's a process of like figuring yourself out and growing.
Yeah.
It's not about trying to be perfectly happy all the time or like getting rid of all the bad feelings. It's more about learning to understand and manage like what's going on inside of us and realizing that the good and the bad are all part of what makes us human.
It's about finding ways to deal with the tough times.
Yeah.
And to like really appreciate the good times when they come around.
Exactly. And the second important thing, I think, is that it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
Hmm.
Burton himself had problems with melancholy, and he wrote The Anatomy of Melancholy partly to like work through his own stuff, but also to connect with other people who might be going through the same thing.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm struggling too, and here are some things I've learned. Maybe they can help you too.
Exactly. He knew how important it was to share experiences
Yeah.
and to feel like you're not alone in your struggles. And that's still so important today, maybe even more so now, because it feels like everyone's kind of isolated and disconnected.
That's so true. We're always seeing these images of perfect lives on social media.
Right.
Like perfect mental health, but Burton's saying, hey, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
Like struggling with your mental health doesn't make you weak. It's just part of being human.
Absolutely. And I think the third important takeaway from Burton is like really knowing yourself.
Hmm.
He believed that understanding your own temperament, like what triggers you, what you're good at, and where you struggle, all of that was crucial to finding, balance and well-being.
It's about taking the time to figure out who you are,
Yeah.
both the good and the bad,
Yes.
and accepting yourself, with all your complexities.
Exactly. And when you have that self-awareness, when you see your own patterns, you can start making choices that are good for your mental health.
Yeah.
Whether it's through diet or exercise, connecting with people, being creative, or getting professional help.
It's about taking control of your mental health,
Yes.
realizing that you can make things better.
Absolutely. And, Burton might not have had all the, tools and stuff we have today,
Uh-huh.
but his basic ideas about balance and taking care of yourself and getting support, those are still super relevant.
So even though he wrote this a long time ago, Burton's work is like this timeless guide
Yeah.
for dealing with mental health and finding your own way to well-being.
I think that's a great way to put it. And as we keep talking about this mad genius idea, it's good to keep these things in mind. It's not about, making mental illness seem glamorous
Right.
or saying that creative people are just defined by their struggles. It's about seeing how complex the human mind is,
Yeah.
how our mental states and creativity can affect each other, and how important it is to be understanding and compassionate
Yeah.
when it comes to mental health.
It's about seeing the whole human experience,
Yeah.
the dark and the light,
Yeah.
and appreciating how everyone with all their strengths and weaknesses contributes to the world.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, it looks like we've come to the end of our discussion for today. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about. Burton believed that having a quiet mind was the key to happiness. In our busy, always connected world, how can we find more of that inner peace, whether we're creative geniuses or not? Join us next time as we dig into this and more on the Mad Genius Thesis.
So we've spent all this time talking about Burton and the anatomy of melancholy and his ideas about what causes melancholy, like the cures he suggested, and how his work kind of fits into this idea of, the mad genius. But before we finish up, I'm curious about Burton himself. Here he was writing this huge, deep exploration of melancholy. Did he ever find any peace? Did it help him with his own struggles? Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people have wondered about that over the years. Burton, even though he struggled with melancholy, seemed to find some comfort in his studies. He was a scholar at Oxford, totally immersed in the world of books and ideas. And he was really into astrology and math.
So a kind of a bookish guy finding comfort in knowledge and being alone?
Seems like it. But he wasn't, completely shut off from everyone. Burton liked to take long walks, sometimes even going out into the countryside to, look at nature and collect plants for his medicinal studies. And he had a close group of friends and colleagues, and they talked about ideas and stuff they were passionate about.
So it wasn't just about escaping into his thoughts. It was also about finding balance by connecting with nature and people.
Exactly. And it's interesting, Burton, even though he knew so much about melancholy, thought that a quiet mind was the key to happiness. He tried to find inner peace through routine, studying, and connecting to something bigger than himself.
That idea of a quiet mind, that's super relevant now, don't you think? We live in this world that's just go, go, go all the time, tons of information and pressure to be on 24/7. It feels like our minds never really get a break.
Yeah, it's true. It makes you think, maybe all this stuff we see as, progress, like technology, being connected all the time, the craziness of modern life, maybe it's actually making us more anxious, stressed, even melancholy.
It's like we've forgotten how to just be still, just
Yeah.
be in the moment without feeling like we have to be constantly doing something, buying something, achieving something. But Burton, even writing centuries ago, seemed to know how important it was to have that inner quiet.
He did. And I think that's something really important for us to think about today. How can we make time for quiet reflection in our busy lives? How can we find those peaceful moments in all the chaos? These are questions we should be asking ourselves, whether we're dealing with melancholy or just trying to live a more balanced and fulfilling life.
Totally. It's we need to rediscover that connection to ourselves, find the things that help us quiet all the noise and feel peaceful again. Maybe it's meditation, spending time in nature, being creative, or just turning off our phones for a while.
Yeah, it could be anything. The important thing is to find what works for you. What helps you feel calm and good. And to remember, it's not about reaching some perfect state. It's about the journey. There will be days when everything feels overwhelming and it's hard to find peace, but just trying, that's what really matters.
That's a great point. So I guess what we're learning from Burton is that mental health is complicated, it's different for everyone, and it's personal. There's no like one right answer or solution. But if we understand ourselves better, explore how our minds and bodies work together, ask for help when we need it, and try to find inner peace, we can deal with life's challenges in a healthier way.
Absolutely. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, with all its interesting ideas and quirks, gives us this timeless guide to understanding what it means to be human and how to deal with the ups and downs of mental well-being.
It's a book that still makes us think and even inspires us all these years later. And it reminds us that these conversations about mental health, creativity, and finding meaning are just as important now as they were back then.
I agree. And as we wrap up, I hope everyone listening feels encouraged to keep having these conversations, in their own lives, to be curious and kind to themselves when exploring their own experiences, and to remember that they're not alone in this.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy and this fascinating idea of the mad genius. We hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something new about yourself along the way.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep being creative, and keep your mind sharp. But also remember to give them a break sometimes.
And if you're struggling, remember, asking for help is a good thing. It shows strength, not weakness. There are people who care about you, and there are resources out there to help you find your way back to a place of balance and well-being.